Spinach is always going to be a winner, but did you know there's a leafy crop that's so much easier to grow, gives lots of lovely leaves for longer, and it looks absolutely stunning too? We're talking about Swiss chard, one of my all-time favourites that I have to grow every year. In this video, I'll take you through every step you need to grow amazing leaves month after month after month. Chard is exceptional, even in its earlier stages of life. Take the seeds, for example. Each one of these rather knobbly looking things is in fact a cluster of seeds capable of producing up to 3 seedlings, each one. I love chard because it's super straightforward, so while it might look like a bit of a diva, it's in fact pretty low maintenance and very reliable. But for me, the real reason it's an absolute winner is its stem and leaf colour. I reckon this is one of the most attractive vegetables you can grow. Here in my mild, temperate climate, I tend to make sowings of chard anytime from spring through to the end of summer. The very earliest sowings give me plants that will crop throughout the summer months, while those sown later in the summer will give plants that will grow on through the autumn, then sit patiently through the winter, ready to explode into life in spring, just as these champions here are poised to do. While you can of course sow chard directly where it's going to grow, and we'll do that shortly, I prefer to make my earliest sowings at least into pots or plug trays of a screened or sieved potting mix. This way I can effectively overlap crops, so while this one is starting off, earlier crops can still be finishing off, and it gives me a little bit of an earlier start at this still cooler time of year. So I've made little depressions into the plug trays here, about 1/2 inch or 1 centimetre deep, and then into each little depression go 2 seeds, and then I'll of course cover them over with more of the potting mix here. Now I've actually gone for slightly bigger plug trays because these guys have a really quite good keen root system and they grow really fast, so something like this will give them a little bit more room till it is time to plant them outside. Now at last spring has arrived here, so it is a bit milder, but I'm still gonna just germinate these under cover in a greenhouse, but a cold frame or anywhere a little bit protected from chilly winds would work absolutely perfectly. I'm blessed with a pretty benign climate that rarely gets too hot or too cold, but if you are gardening in the extremes, well, chard still has your back. Now if you get really hot kind of summers, then you've got 2 options. You could sow in the spring to give you a crop until it gets too hot and it can't grow any longer, or perhaps even better, make a sowing towards the end of summer or early autumn for plants that will grow through the autumn, perhaps give a few pickings throughout the winter, and then burst back into life in spring until heat stops play. And if you're in a climate with really cold, severe winters where the ground remains frozen for weeks on end, well, just make your sowings early in the spring for cropping throughout the growing season. For a more precise range of sowing dates, consider using our garden planner, which uses your nearest weather station to work out precisely the best sowing, planting and harvest dates specific to your location. As an easy-going, no dramas kind of crop, any variety of chard is going to do pretty well for you. So really what it comes down to is a matter of taste, what colour you like. And chard is renowned for its rather zany stem colours, which range from red to yellow to pink to plain old, though still rather fetching white. I can never decide, so I opt for a variety that offers a range of colours, typically sold as bright lights or rainbow chard. But if you want a variety with a specific colour, say a shocking lipstick pink for example, well, you can choose a variety for that. On the other hand, if determination, cold tolerance and sheer abundance is what you're after, well, opt for the ivory-stemmed, award-winning Ford Hook Giant, which is aptly named for its muscular stems and outsized leaves. You can also get a good idea of the final stem colour by looking at the seedlings themselves. So once they're up, you can make a selection and plant accordingly. Most of these have pink stems, but there are some darker leaf ones in there as well with red stems. So you could, for example, plant alternating colours, whatever your fancy is. And I'd say that these guys are so attractive, in fact, that they look awesome in just an ornamental border as well. Because these guys are so prolific, you may find that just 5 or 6 plants is enough to give you a little bunch of leaves to harvest every few days. But because they are so beautiful and so versatile in the kitchen, I reckon it's worth growing many more than that. Once the seedlings pop up in maybe 1 to 2 weeks, you can thin out the seedlings to leave anywhere between 1 and 3 seedlings in each plug. Now, there's no exact science to this. If you are after the largest plants with the biggest leaves, then maybe leave just 1 in each plug. But if you're not bothered by that and are happy with lots of reasonably sized leaves, well, I reckon they grow rather well as a cluster. As you can see, these are a pretty good size, so I reckon it's time to plant. I'm going to pop my chard into this bed here. Now, it gets a mixture of sun for some of the day and then shade for the rest. And a part shaded spot like this is just fine for chard. In fact, chard will do reasonably enough in a fully shaded spot and will actually relish a cooler position like this in hot summers. Let's take a closer look at the soil here. Now, it's been a really wet winter, and despite a few days of nice dry sunny weather, well, the ground here is absolutely saturated. So growing the chard in a raised bed like this really helps because it's started to drain through nicely and is dried out enough to plant. Now, I improved this in the autumn with a nice barrow load of well-rotted manure and some leaves. So I'm just going to start by removing the last of the not quite decomposed leaves. And then for good measure, I've got some chicken manure pellets. Now, chicken manure pellets are relatively high in nitrogen, and as a leafy crop, chard will absolutely love that because nitrogen promotes plenty of leafy growth. So let's just go in with a couple of handfuls of that, and then we're good to start planting. I'm going to plant these about 10 inches or 25 centimetres apart, and I have to do it correctly because I got my garden supervisor keeping a close beady eye on me. Good girl, Rosie. I mentioned earlier that kind of 5 or 6 plants is enough. I'm going to plant about a dozen today because I use these in just about everything. So as well as kind of steaming them and using them in my smoothies, I also rather like to blend them up with a batter mix to give green pancakes. And that always goes down really well with my Isla, who loves her pancakes. So need plenty of chard for that. All laid out, and then to plant, just dibber a hole with your fingers like that and lightly firm it in. Now, I'd love to know what your preferred way of using chard is. So do let me know in the comments your best way of cooking or using it in the kitchen. I'd say the best time to plant chard earlier in the season is around mid-spring, about 2 weeks or so before your last frost date, as soon as the soil is workable and not too cold to touch. Now, if chard experiences too many cold nights, well, it can encourage it to bolt or flower prematurely, which will just mean fewer leaves and smaller leaves at that. What do you reckon, Rosie? An acceptable job? Good point. We need to water. While we're here, just let me show you how easy it is to sow them direct into the ground where they're going to grow. So all I do is just make spacings of little holes, about the same spacing I want the plants to finally grow. So there's 4, for example. And then I just drop in 2 or 3 seeds into each hole like that, and then cover them over. And then when they come out, I can just thin as required to however many little plants I want. And that's it. And obviously keep this area nice and moist until they are up. Chard also does quite well in containers, but let me show you something first. This here is the long taproot of a chard that's been sitting around for almost a year. You can see it gets pretty big, so we don't want to use a shallow container. This is about as shallow as I would go, so that's what we're going to use. I'm going to use a mix of 50-50 just sort of garden compost and then the rest of our just an all-purpose potting mix and just kind of mix it up as I feel like that. Just rescue the little earthworms that get in there so they can get back out. Right, now because this is nice and fertile and rich, I'm going to plant them a little bit closer, about maybe 5 inches or what's that, 12-13 centimetres apart. So I can probably get in here, probably 3 clusters of little seedlings is about right. There we are. Now I'll need to keep a close eye on these and keep them well watered because they'll be very dependent on me to get all that they need. But as long as I keep them watered, I should have some lovely baby leaves to start harvesting within a month. Chard, of course, produces lots of soft, leafy growth. So as well as good nutrition in the soil, the other thing, of course, to watch out for is that things don't dry out. Make sure there's enough soil moisture, and in dry weather, prioritise your chard for more of the wet stuff. Once plants are a little bit bigger, I like to apply a mulch around them. Now this could be something like dried grass clippings, straw, or as I'm doing here at this time of year, just old dried kind of part shredded leaves like this. Now, as well as locking in really valuable soil moisture, this will of course help to keep weeds down, and keeping weeds at bay is something that's definitely worth aspiring to with these guys. Now, another thing I absolutely love about chard is that they suffer from very few pests and hardly any diseases. Now, you may get a little bit of nibblings from slugs on plants early in the season like here, but as you can see, it's not a massive problem and these will soon grow out and away from that. Leaf miners can sometimes be a nuisance too, and I've had them before. Now these guys will appear later in spring, and what they do is they tunnel within the leaves as they feed to create a kind of papery blown effect that kills off the bit of the leaf that they feed in. Now the way to deal with that is simply to pick off affected leaves promptly to stop it spreading, and then crush or smash the leaves to kill off the grubs before then adding that to the compost heap. Leaf miners are often predated on by little tiny wasps. So one strategy which I'm going to employ this year is to plant many more wasp attracting flowers, the little tiny wasps, which will then go on to munch on those leaf miners. Now 2 flowers that are really great for that are sweet alyssum or alyssum and calendula, or the pot marigold. Now I did a recent video on calendula, a really stunning flower, so I'll link to that in the video description, but there's a couple of plants in, create a little sort of ring of protection around them. Chard may be ready to start harvesting as soon as a month after planting, starting with baby leaves for salads. And then as plants grow on and mature, you can start harvesting fuller sized leaves for cooking. Now these creamy, almost buttery textured leaves are absolutely loaded with vitamins and antioxidants. This really is a leafy superfood. To harvest the leaves, just twist or cut free the outermost leaves, leaving the ones in the middle to grow on and produce your next harvest. Try to harvest to leave an inch or 2 of stump right at the base of each leaf to avoid damaging the base of the plant from where those new leaves will emerge. And the best bit, as you harvest, more light and air will be able to reach the younger leaves in the middle, speeding up their growth and the time to your next harvest. While large leaves are certainly impressive, the best texture is to be had from slightly more modest sized leaves, so don't let them grow more than about a foot long. Chard is easy to grow, yet surprisingly expensive in the grocery store, so it makes complete sense to grow it yourself. And if you do get too much of it, well, I reckon a lovely bunch of colourful, nutritional leaves make the perfect gift for friends, family and neighbours who you might just be able to bribe to look after your vegetable garden while you're away. Keep plants cropping for longer as cooler weather approaches in autumn by covering your plants with something to keep the chill off, like a cloche or row cover. Now time your sowings right and you could have chard cropping right through into winter and then new plants taking off in spring, ideally filling up that hungry gap when there are thin pickings to be had elsewhere. One thing I know for sure is that chard is a total winner in my garden. What a beauty! Goodness me, isn't it exciting to get some new chard into the ground already? I'm looking forward to months and months of lovely leaves. I hope you're inspired to grow it too. I'll catch you next time.